I'm still taking 50 milligrams of iodine every day, apart from having a break, a couple of days break every week. And I really do feel a lot better, considerably more energetic. Not today. Today I'm a little bit tired, and that's my own fault because I was socialising quite a lot over the weekend. And before that I had a really hectic week last week, so I just need a really good sleep. But I really think that the iodine, the high dose iodine, seems to be working. First of all, my resting pulse rate it always goes up and down a bit, but it was generally about low 50s, 50 beats a minute. And now it seems to be more in the 60s, 60 to 65 beats a minute generally. It is early days. I've been doing this now for 5 weeks. And from what I've read, I gather that you need about 3 to 6 months really to recover from an iodine deficiency. But I think the signs are there. I think things are improving. My temperature readings are still quite low, but they're maybe not as low as they were, but they're still a little bit on the low side. Another very positive development is that I've lost 1 pound in weight. At least I had when I checked the scales this morning. And I know that weight loss can go up and down a lot, so I might check it tomorrow and find that I've gained another couple of pounds. I did lose a couple of pounds a few weeks ago when I did my juice feast that completely failed. And I was expecting that to go back on, but it didn't. So at the moment, at this morning's count, I'm down 3 pounds. So that's a positive development. Another thing is my energy levels, as I mentioned before briefly. A few weeks ago, I went on a hill walking weekend with my hill walking club to Aviemore, and we were hill walking every single day. In fact, I was leading a couple of walks. Usually I just do, I'm used to doing 1 walk a day, but the fact that I could do 3 consecutive days of hill walking and feel fine every day, and afterwards I didn't have aches and pains, I felt great. So I do think that my energy levels are on the rise, and I might even start yet again trying to get back into running. I really want to try it. If I could do a 10k again, like I used to do 10ks at least once every year. So if I could get back to that, I would be over the moon. The one other thing I think the other positive thing that I've noticed is that I'm not having to do the salt loading every day. I only do it every 2 days now, sometimes even every 3 or 4 days, and I feel fine doing that. So that's an indication that maybe I've detoxed, got rid of some of the toxins that might have been causing this problem in the first place. Bromides are the ones that are usually suspected of causing iodine deficiency. And I've always been a bit suspicious about that because I'm in the UK, and as far as I gather, I don't think we have very many bromides in food or in fire retardants. I think they were outlawed in the early 1990s. But I'm not an expert. I need to do more reading around this subject. The chemical I do suspect could be behind this, chlorine, because we have chlorine in the water. And of course, water does need to be purified, so I'm not objecting to having that purification. But chlorine is also a halogen. And apparently that means that it can bind to the same receptors that iodine binds to, and it could knock iodine out of the body. So what I've been doing as a precaution, because I take a lot of baths, I've been using this bath ball. It's a sort of purification ball that you put in your bath, and you have to swoosh it around for 3 minutes before you have a bath, which is a little bit inconvenient. But I'm going to, at the moment, I'm trying anything. So at least it's putting my mind, it's making me feel a bit calmer about getting into that water, because apparently you can absorb a lot more chlorine through your skin than you can through drinking, which is quite surprising. But I've also been using a charcoal stick to purify my water. And that seems even more woo in a way. But I'm just going to try it and see if it works. It doesn't impede the taste of the water at all. And you just put it in there, leave it in there. Don't know how long you need to leave it for. And then apparently it can take out a lot of the chlorine impurities. Apparently this is really popular in Japan. And considering that the Japanese seem to be pretty healthy generally, and they're one of the most long-lived races on the planet, then if they're doing it, then it seems like a good idea. So I've been looking at other possible reasons or possible things that might have triggered this condition. And it could be the menopause. Because I had my menopause in 2012, I'm 54 now. At the time, I was much slimmer, and I remained slim for about a year after that. And to be honest, I barely even noticed the menopause. I didn't notice it until about 6 months after it probably happened. A friend of mine, we were actually on holiday in Arran, and she said, "Natalie, have you had the menopause yet?" And I said, I think I must have, because I haven't had a period for 6 months. And that was it. I just have had none of the symptoms that you normally associate with the menopause. I didn't have hot flushes or night sweats. I wasn't upset. I didn't start screaming or getting moody. Maybe the reason that I'd hardly noticed it was because around that time my father had a stroke, and a few months later he died, and I was so busy visiting him in hospital and then in the care home that he was in. So there were a lot of things happening, and it just didn't seem to be a huge priority in my life to be worrying about things like that. But from what I've heard, when you go through the menopause, it's obviously a hormonal thing, and iodine is important for the sexual organs. So if something like that's happening, and it's also when young girls are starting to have their periods, then the iodine is needed for the sex hormones, and that's where it goes. And that can deprive it, and that can cause deprivations of iodine in other parts of the body. This is what I've read in Lynn Farrow's book and in David Brownstein's books. So that could be an issue. I'm also wondering whether there could be a genetic trigger to this condition. When I started really having these symptoms, and at the time I was just wondering what on earth was going on. I'd put on weight, I was so fatigued all the time, my face was looking puffy, and I noticed that I kept clearing my throat even though I didn't have a cold. I actually haven't had a full-blown cold. Occasionally I get sniffly, but I haven't had a cold for about 2 years. But I do sometimes find myself clearing my throat as if there's an obstruction there. And when I started doing this a lot, I realised that my dad used to do it. It sort of reminded me of my father. He used to clear his throat, and he never ever got colds. And then I realised that sometimes when my face looked puffy and I was really tired, I looked in the mirror and somehow I was reminded of my father again. I've got a similar body shape to his, because he was very tall and slim when he was young. I'm not particularly tall, but I've got relatively slim hips and broad shoulders, and that's the same body type as my father. And when I put on weight, it goes around my middle, just like my dad. So when my dad was in middle age, he started putting on a lot of weight, and it seemed as if he just couldn't stop eating. He was always eating fatty foods and going out for meals and things. He just loved his food. And he got high blood pressure, and then a few years later he got diabetes. And these caused a lot of health problems for him. And it was probably at this period that I was starting to think, no, I want to be really healthy. I want to start eating healthy food and doing lots of exercise, because I've been looking after my health for decades, which is one reason why I just thought I couldn't believe it when I started feeling like this and suddenly the weight went on. But so when I started getting these health symptoms, I thought, maybe my dad had the same condition. Maybe all underlying all the problems he had with his diabetes and his high blood pressure, maybe underlying all that was a thyroid problem. Interestingly, I was having a conversation with my mum about goiters. Goiters are when you get a big swelling in your neck, and it's caused by iodine deficiency, and it's very associated with hyperthyroidism as well as hypothyroidism. So I was discussing this, and Mum suddenly said, remember when your father had that operation in the early 90s? Which I did remember, because we were absolutely terrified. He was in hospital and we thought, we knew he was having a tumour removed, and we were so relieved to find it was non-malignant. So my mum suddenly said, it wasn't a tumour, it was an internal goiter. And of course, at this, I nearly fell over when I heard that. I said, you never told me that. You always said it was a non-malignant tumour. And she said, no. It was an internal goiter. It was an enormous internal goiter. And it was so big that it was in danger of restricting his breathing. And that's why they had to operate. Anyway, I pushed my mum. I kept saying, are you sure it was a goiter? You never told me that before. Or there must have been some kind of confusion. Maybe at the time I just didn't really understand what a goiter was. But she was insistent it was an internal goiter. But I am certain that my father was never diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And yet, looking back, I've thought, even before she told me that, I thought, he's had all the signs. He used to be very active. He used to play tennis. And then he played table tennis. He used to teach table tennis to young people. And then he started getting more and more sluggish, which many men do. But I actually think that hypothyroidism is a lot more common than people realise. And of course, he got that typical beer belly that many of his men of his age get. Although he didn't really drink beer very much. He was more of a whiskey man. So he certainly drank, but not beer. And he slowed down. He just didn't do any exercise really in his middle age. He started going for walks. I think he liked that, but not particularly long walks. And he got all these health problems. Looking back, I would imagine that he probably had hypothyroidism, and I think that hypothyroidism is probably linked to diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is the type that my dad had. Certainly, after my father had that operation, I think it was 1992 he had it. So he lived for another 20 years, and he had a very good life really in his later years. He did a lot, but at a slow pace. But in his later years, he did really slow down, and he did get quite ill, which was really sad. He lived to the age of 87, but he could have had a more active and enjoyable life, I think, if that underlying problem had been diagnosed. I just spoke to my sister about this. My sister's a doctor, so she kind of knows what she's talking about more than I do on these matters. She said that it wasn't a goiter, it was a benign tumour of the thyroid. I suppose that means an internal thyroid nodule, and it had grown very large and it was obstructing my dad's breathing. At the time, she said, there was a lot of concern that he could have cancer, and the reason for this was apparently his thyroid hormone levels were measured and found to be normal. And for that reason, they thought maybe there's something else causing this. In the end, it turned out not to be cancer. It turned out to be this benign tumour of the thyroid. Now, I do still think there's a connection. I don't know, but I'm going to look into it more, because I think I just felt that when I started noticing the similarity between me clearing my throat a lot recently, despite not having a cold and feeling fine, and my dad used to do the same thing, it did feel as if there could be some sort of obstruction there. Could be complete coincidence, or it could be that maybe I've got the beginnings of some sort of nodule. If so, I really hope that the iodine is going to halt it, because it does seem there's a lot of conflicting research out there, but it does seem as if there's an iodine deficiency connection with thyroid nodules. So I think it is possible that there could be some genetic trigger behind this, because I could see the same patterns happening to me, and they were happening so quickly and apparently uncontrollably that it was such a shock. In 2012, my weight was 9.5 stone. That's 133 pounds or 60 kilograms, and my BMI was 22.8. So that put me firmly in the healthy weight category. Then in late 2014, my weight had just ballooned to 11.5 stone, which is the equivalent of 161 pounds, 73 kilograms. And my BMI at that point was 27.8. That was definitely in the overweight category, not that far off being in the obese category. If your BMI is 30, apparently that makes you obese. And it's come down since then. It went down to about 11 stone 2 or 156 pounds for a while. And now it's about 11 stone or 154 pounds, 70 kilograms. That gives me a BMI of 26.4. So I'm still in the overweight category, but I think things are moving in the right direction now. When I first noticed my weight going up, I've never been overweight in my life really, maybe once or twice, but I've always managed to get my weight controlled quite easily. And at this point, there was just nothing I did worked. I was already eating probably 60% of my diet was raw food, fruit and vegetables. But I don't blame them for the weight going on, definitely not. It was definitely some sort of imbalance. It could have been because maybe I wasn't getting enough iodine in my diet. There's so many questions about this, but certainly I wasn't stuffing my face with fatty foods. That was definitely the case. And I had a very active job. I was running my juice and smoothie bar, so I was running around the place all the time. So I think it's important that even though I'm really not massively overweight, I'm not desperately ill, this is why I think it's important to try and stop this problem before it develops into something that could be serious. There is another interesting aspect to this. In 2014, I went a month eating only raw foods. It was the 100% January raw challenge on Facebook. And I quite enjoyed it. I was surprised that I didn't really crave anything except for the raw foods until the end, just towards the end of the month. I actually gave it up after 28 days because I suddenly started craving fish and eggs. And after I'd given up, stopped eating just raw foods, I got a cold. And I felt almost as if my body could sense the cold coming on, and for some reason I needed the fish and eggs. Maybe it was to do with a need for iodine, I just don't know, but that's what happened. During that month, obviously I had to give up coffee, and before that I'd been an absolute coffee addict. I could not face the day without a very strong cup of black coffee. In fact, I would, if I had my way at that time, I probably would have just drunk coffee all day. But because I liked it so strong, I tried to keep it just down to 1 or maybe 2 cups a day. And I was surprised at how easily I gave up coffee during that month. And when the month was over, I just lost the taste for caffeine. Not just coffee, but tea as well. I just didn't want it. It actually made me, it brought on a kind of gag reflex. Before I did the month of the raw month, I had 3 occasions when I'd been happily eating my breakfast, feeling great and drinking my morning coffee, and suddenly I had this kind of gag reflex. I just felt this wave, really strong wave of nausea, and I just had to stop right there. I couldn't continue to drink the coffee at the time. And then the next day I would go back to it. And it happened, as I remember, 3 times. I didn't really think that much of it, but I did discuss it with my sister, and she said that she'd occasionally had a similar thing. She wondered whether it was due to gallstones. I can't remember why, but she was looking at that possibility. Anyway, I didn't think much of it. I just thought, great, I've just suddenly given up coffee after all these years, after 3 decades of being a coffee addict. I don't even want it. And I got to the stage where if I went out for a meal, quite often I usually like to have a nice cup of coffee after the meal. I couldn't even finish a cup of coffee if I had one after a meal. It was really strange. So I was quite happy. Suddenly no longer a caffeine addict after all that time. And now occasionally I've had a coffee, usually a soy milk coffee, because I can't have cow's milk. So usually about once every 2 months I might have a coffee, a sort of cappuccino or something. But now I've found that I'm slightly going back to the caffeine. Occasionally I've had a black coffee and enjoyed it. And slightly more concerning, I've started feeling cravings for coffee again. But I wonder if that's something to do with whether it's hypothyroidism, something to do with my thyroid, something going on around here was making me gag when I had caffeine. And now, maybe it's getting better, maybe because of taking the iodine, maybe whatever it is easing away. And the downside of that, whatever way you look at it, suddenly I'm starting to get those cravings for caffeine again. I'm going to try and keep the cravings to a minimum anyway, because it's great to enjoy coffee and not to be an addict. So that's why I'm going to try and keep it. But anyway, it's very interesting, and I'm going to do a lot more research into this. So, as always, I will report back and keep you posted with any progress or any new interests and insights I might have. Thanks again for watching.